Hello, welcome. I'm Daniel Che here to bring the latest. Let's begin with our top story. Ballot counting for the 20th presidential election is now well underway. Most polling stations close at 6 p.m. local time. Voting ended at 7:30 p.m. for COVID-19 patients and those in quarantine. Our Jae-myung is out at one of the counting stations in Seoul. Jae-myung, what can you tell us at this point?
Daniel, I'm here at Seoul National University Gymnasium, which is one of the venues where the ballots are being counted. Behind me, there are hundreds of staff and volunteers who are busy counting and busy processing the ballots, and they'll be working late into the night. This is what you would see at most of the counting stations across South Korea. The ballot counting area behind me is under strict control. All staff are wearing protective masks against COVID-19, and only vote counting staff can enter the work area. Policemen nationwide are on full standby at the counting stations to ensure safe and accurate proceedings. The police have been deployed nearly 70,000 personnel to provide security at polling and counting stations, ready for any possible situations on the election day. The police have also delivered the ballot boxes to the counting stations in their constituencies. There are 251 centers nationwide counting the ballots tonight. The National Election Commission says it'll do its utmost to manage the election throughout.
The National Election Commission has been devoted in its preparations for the election so that voters can exercise their right of suffrage without any difficulties. We will do our best until the polling and counting ends.
And due to the pandemic and a record early voting turnout, the counting is expected to take longer compared to past elections. Do we have a rough estimate of when the winner could be announced?
Daniel, ruling Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung and main opposition People Power Party candidate Yoon have been neck and neck in the campaign to become the next president. So it could be a long haul tonight, and we might not be able to get a clear picture of the result until 1 or 2 a.m. And South Korea will be waking up to the results at about 6 a.m. on Thursday when the ballot counting comes to the end. The National Election Commission will be showing the updates online. In the previous 19th presidential election, it took nearly 6 hours until the ballot count was completed. But the ballot counting process could take longer this time than in the previous election. That's because the early voting had the highest ever vote turnout at roughly 37%. And for the early voting ballots, all the envelopes that the ballots are in should be opened before they get counted, so it could take longer to count the votes. Also, the ballots cast by COVID-19 patients and those in quarantine are counted separately. So a little bit of patience is required for all of us as we go into tonight, waiting for those official results. This is all I have for now, but I'll bring more updates in our later newscast. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, moving on. This is the first presidential election that allowed voting age was lowered to 18 here in South Korea. Plus, there are a growing number of people who have gained the right to cast a ballot as naturalized citizens. Issue has the full story.
18-year-old South Koreans were able to cast their first vote at a younger age than ever before for this presidential election. This is because the Public Official Election Act was revised in 2019, lowering the election age from 19 to 18. Before, people could serve in the military, pay taxes, or get a driver's license starting at the age of 18, but were unable to vote until they were 19. The change in law enabled around 500,000 18-year-olds to participate in this election. The 18-year-olds we met expressed their excitement at being able to cast their first vote.
Voting for the first time made me feel like a real citizen of this country. It was meaningful. I wish that many 18-year-olds like me will vote so they can contribute to the advancement of the country.
As for what they want from a new president, many are hoping for someone who can solve issues that affect the youth of today. They also wish for a South Korea where the young can aspire to a better future.
I wish for a country where young people can dream. I hope that issues with housing prices and job opportunities are alleviated.
They also welcome the lowered voting age that allows their voices to be heard.
Some people might ask, what difference can a year make? But I think that through the 1 year difference, we can better hear the voices of the younger generation.
18-year-olds are not the only first-time voters in this election. Some naturalized citizens also cast their first-ever vote in South Korea. Professional volleyball player Jin Ji-wi from Hong Kong is one of them. This was the first presidential election since he became a naturalized citizen in 2019.
My first election was a little nerve-wracking but amazing at the same time because it was the first big event I could participate in as a Korean citizen.
He added that he wishes for a country that shows more support for multiculturalism.
Different cultures each have their own perks. If the cultures could mix well and form a harmony, I think it'll be better for the country.
이시후, Arirang News.
Now let's turn to our Yoon Jung-min for the latest figures and voting results. Jung-min, do walk us through the digits.
Sure, Daniel. So first, take a look at the exit poll results by South Korea's three main broadcasters, KBS, MBC, and SBS. The main opposition, People Power Party's Yoon Sung-yeol, slightly leads the ruling Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung by 0.6 percentage points. And we are seeing more election results coming in so far. 0.6% of the vote is counted, and so far, Lee Jae-myung is leading Yoon Sung-yeol by a margin of 55% to 41%. And let's check this out by region. So first, capital Seoul. Lee Jae-myung is in the lead with 48% support, and Yoon Sung-yeol has gained 46%. Next to Busan. In this region, Yoon Sung-yeol is taking a clear lead here with a 53% vote, and Lee Jae-myung has earned 43%. Next to Daegu. In this region, one of the conservative strongholds, the main opposition People Power Party's Yoon Sung-yeol has earned 53%. That's almost 54%. And next to Incheon, Yoon Sung-yeol is taking the lead here with 52%, and Lee Jae-myung has earned 44%. Next to Gwangju, no results in. Next to Daejeon, no results in this region either. And we go next to Ulsan. We are still waiting for some reporting here. Next to Sejong, no results as well. Next to Gyeonggi-do province. As for this region, the DP's Lee Jae-myung has previously worked as a governor for this region. So let's see what's happening here. So DP's Lee Jae-myung, I want to go back to the Gyeonggi-do province region. So Lee Jae-myung was leading here, and now to Gangwon-do province. Here, Yoon Sung-yeol is taking a clear lead with almost a 58% vote, and Lee Jae-myung takes 38% of the vote. Next to Chungcheong-bukdo province, to the middle part of the region, Yoon Sung-yeol is outperforming Lee Jae-myung by a margin of 56% to almost Lee Jae-myung with 40%. Next to Chungcheong-namdo province. Here, Yoon Sung-yeol is a clear lead here with 55%, and Lee Jae-myung has earned 46% support. Next to Jeollabuk-do province. It's one of the liberal strongholds, so when you take a look here, the DP's Lee Jae-myung is a clear leader here with 87% support, and whereas Yoon Sung-yeol has only gained about 10% support. Next to Jeollanam-do province. Here, also liberal stronghold, Lee Jae-myung has earned 89% support, and Yoon Sung-yeol had gained almost 9% vote. Next to Gyeongsang-bukdo province. This is one of the conservative strongholds. When you take a look here, the PPP's Yoon Sung-yeol has almost gained 77% vote, and Lee Jae-myung, followed by Lee Jae-myung with 20% of the vote. Next to Gyeongsang-namdo province. Yoon Sung-yeol is taking a lead here with 66%, and followed by Lee Jae-myung with almost 30%. Next to Jeju. Last but not least, Jeju, we are still waiting for some results coming in here. That's all from me for now, but I will bring more updates later on.
Let's now check in with our campaign correspondent for Kim Do-yeon with the ruling Democratic Party's nominee. What are you hearing from inside the Lee Jae-myung camp now?
Good evening, Daniel. I'm at the campaign headquarters of the ruling Democratic Party of Korea, where the campaign members are watching the vote count unfold. Now, a couple of hours ago here, we saw the campaign cheer enthusiastically to the early exit poll results, despite Lee trailing by a slim margin. That's because the results reflected what they had been expecting, unlike the main opposition People Power Party, which had expected a larger margin for their lead. A campaign official here said that with the early votes accounting for almost half of all the votes, and COVID-19 patients and overseas voters also not taken into account in early exit polls, results can certainly be different. In addition, Lee Jae-myung was leading in terms of votes cast by people in their 20s and has been helped by the majority of women voters choosing him. Now, those were the results from the three main broadcasters of the country, but on a separate exit poll done by another channel, JTBC, the results actually had Lee beating Yoon by a slim margin. As for the candidate himself, Lee Jae-myung is currently at home, but is expected to join his colleagues here when the results start to get clear. Daniel?
All right, now to our Lee Kyung-un, who has been following the People Power Party's campaign. Kyung-un, what's the atmosphere there like, and how about the candidate himself, Yoon Sung-yeol?
Well, Daniel, things are pretty calm here, and we could also feel some sense of disappointment among party officials and a dramatic shift in mood. When the exit poll results for Seoul City came out, there was some clapping and cheering because Yoon was ahead of Lee. But that did not last because the nationwide exit poll suggests that Yoon is only ahead of Lee by an extremely slim margin of just some 0.6 percentage points. That's dramatically lower than the up to 10 percentage points that the party chairman Lee Jae-myung had previously expected. And adding to their anxiety is the independent exit poll by JTBC that shows Lee with a slight lead. Campaign chief Kwon Young-se, in an interview with KBS, described that as an unpleasant surprise, saying that it's just too different from their projections. Kwon said that the party will cautiously wait and see what happens as the ballots are counted. Some are still staying optimistic, saying Yoon can still win by up to 8 percentage points. At this time, Yoon Sung-yeol is still staying at home, and he is not expected to come here until we get a clearer picture, which we are expecting to be around 1 or 2 a.m. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, Toyoung Kyung-un, thank you for being out there for us. We'll be checking back with you later. South Korea's presidential election is getting widespread coverage overseas. Chinese and Japanese media say the results will influence diplomatic ties with Seoul. The New York Times pointed to rising housing prices and cross-border ties as major issues in the election. Kim Da-mi tells us more.
South Korea's presidential election will determine the direction of Korean Peninsula issues and Seoul-Beijing relations. That's what China's Global Times published on Tuesday, saying the two countries' trade volume has risen sixfold compared to 30 years ago, and the bilateral relationship moved forward, not backwards. The editorial then stressed it is necessary for the president-elect to continue to act as a bridge to resolve the balance problem between the U.S. and China. Japan's Kyodo News said election results will affect North Korea policies, as well as Seoul's ties with Tokyo that have been worsening under the current Moon administration. Pointing out the leading candidate's distinctive stance on Japan, NHK also expects the results to greatly influence the currently icy Seoul-Tokyo relations. The Nihon Keizai Shimbun pointed to Korean millennials and Generation Zs as a major factor in the election. New York Times sees the soaring house prices and relations with Pyongyang as major issues. It then mentioned a sense of disillusionment among voters who have called the race, quote, an election of unlikables, with frontrunners leading campaigns dogged by accusations of corruption and nepotism. Meanwhile, the BBC and The Guardian have published stories about gender issues, saying the candidates have tried to reach out to young male voters and discussing the use and abuse of the concept of feminism throughout the election campaign period. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
For a deeper analysis of the 2022 presidential election and what lies ahead for the incoming administration, we are joined by Professor Mason Richey from Hankuk University of Foreign Study. Professor Richey, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, as expected, incredible turnout for the election. Is it a reflection of disappointment and need for change, or is it a devotion to ensuring a continuation of the status quo?
Yeah, so the turnout was indeed very solid, somewhere comparable, I think, to 2017, roughly 75% or so. I would honestly chalk this up to disappointment and even irritation, and that in a number of ways. I mean, first of all, with the campaigns, which were marked by gaffes and by unforced errors and mistakes of judgment by the campaigns themselves, and also disappointment in the candidates. And you might think that these uninspiring candidates and campaigns and platforms, would lead to a lower turnout. But I think to some degree, what we've seen with a relatively solid turnout is, in fact, that people are motivated by, I think, abhorrence of the opposite candidate from the one they support, as well as an irritation with the inability of the campaigns to voice messages that speak to their concerns, and an overall fear that if the other side wins, they're going to lead the country down a dramatically terrible path. And we've seen, for instance, in the U.S., that in fact you can have some very large turnout numbers even when in fact neither candidate really inspires people. We saw that actually in the most recent U.S. presidential election, where Joe Biden was not particularly inspiring, but he actually got quite a significant turnout, the highest in Democratic voter history, in fact, mostly because Democratic voters were terrified of another period of 4 years of Donald Trump. So I think the disappointment is an important word there. And I think really what it reflects is the polarization in Korea as much as anything else.
Right, blocking someone instead of supporting another seems to be one of the motivations. For this new administration, there will be major tasks in terms of diplomacy. For the following topics, could you fill us in on the direction that's been taken by the current government, the Moon administration, and what could be the possible direction ahead for the incoming government? Let's start with cross-border ties.
Sure. So obviously, that's one of the most significant things in foreign policy and diplomacy here on the Korean Peninsula. The Moon government has really privileged every possible effort to work with North Korea, and North Korea has, really since the breakdown of diplomacy in Hanoi in 2019, rebuffed almost all efforts at meaningful dialogue and engagement. They've gone, in fact, in the opposite direction with increasing missile testing and also quite a significant turn inward. Probably some of that is for its own purposes and its own reasons. Some of that is also being driven and has been driven by COVID. So when the new administration comes in, whoever that's going to be, obviously, North Korea is going to be one of the most important things to deal with, but there's still, at the end of the day, regardless of which policy preference they take, and you imagine Lee will be more conciliatory towards North Korea than Yoon will be, who's more likely to take a harder line stance, still going to, at the end of the day, have to deal with a recalcitrant North Korea who simply may not want to engage diplomatically, at least in a timeline that might fit what either of these presidents-elects would be interested in, and quite possibly some very nasty surprises coming up in terms of potential missile tests and nuclear tests and other developments of North Korea's weapons of mass destruction program.
Right. It started with great expectations and hopes, but things took a turn for, unfortunately, the worse. When it comes to relationship with North Korea, of course, one other country comes to mind, Korea's traditional ally, the U.S. The all-important alliance with the U.S., what can we expect moving forward, and how has it changed during the Moon administration?
So in terms of the Moon administration, he's done largely a pretty good job of keeping the alliance going in the right direction. They've worked together, the Moon administration, with both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, most of the time relatively productively. They've had some differences on some various items, including on North Korea and wartime operational control transfer and a few other things. But generally, they've kept the alliance going in the right direction. Arguably, one of the things that's been the biggest problem has been the reduction and in some cases suspension of military exercises. And so, I think you can expect that the Biden administration, regardless of who comes in, will at some point push to get those military exercises back on track the way that they were pre-COVID and, frankly speaking, pre-Trump. Neither candidate, is really going to be able to move very far one way or the other on the alliance, especially in the case of Lee, who might ideologically want somewhat more autonomy from the U.S. But at the end of the day, South Korea is sort of constrained in how much it can hold the U.S. at arm's length. The U.S. is its security guarantor. Lee knows that as well. And Yoon, of course, being from the Conservative Party and knowing the people who are around him in terms of his foreign policy team, are going, they're going to really make cooperating with the U.S. Very important, not only in terms of the alliance on the Korean Peninsula, but expanding that alliance outward and looking more globally. And I think that might be the biggest difference. I think Lee Jae-myung, if he comes into office, he's going to have a more traditional Democratic Party approach, which is a bit more parochial and peninsula oriented in terms of the alliance. And Yoon, I think, will want to make it more global and regional in scope.
Right. The pandemic changed everyone's lives, and some praised the success of K-quarantine, and then criticisms followed. What should be the approach for the new government in terms of living with COVID and also fighting the virus?
Well, I'm certainly no epidemiological expert, but I think if I were advising either of these new presidents coming into office, I would tell them, try to make fighting the virus both epidemiologically and in terms of the economy, as separated from ideology as you can. Follow experts and expertise to the extent that you can, and also follow the virus. We don't know what's going to happen, over the next weeks in terms of the extent to which the current Omicron wave will crash. If South Korea looks like other countries, such as the U.S. or countries in Europe, we can expect it to crash, and hopefully there'll be a new normal, which will be, both from a public health perspective and also from an economic perspective, much more salutary. But of course, we don't know what other variants might be coming in the future, and so it seems like one of the things I would advise would be to pay attention to the experts, obviously figure out what's going to happen with vaccines going forward and future boosters, and then treatments and making sure that you have enough hospital beds and other treatment options are available as we continue to muddle through COVID the rest of this year and possibly into the future.
Delegating experts with the responsibilities and, of course, some degree of control over the situation would be a very wise advice, of course. In terms of businesses that were adversely affected by some of the strict measures, the government tried to make up for it, but some may say it was not enough. What would be the direction forward for the new government?
Well, again, I think you're going to have to follow the virus to some degree. I think that they'll be relatively flexible and again, probably try to follow, the sound knowledge and good judgment of experts, in terms of the public health impacts of, opening up the economy or keeping the economy closed, relatively closed down. But I think at some point you're going to have to make some tough decisions. Especially ones, I think, economically that are becoming increasingly imperative, because you simply can't run all of the small businesses and the mom and pop enterprises out of business, and at the same time there's not enough funding and there's not enough room available in the budget to be able to cover those holes without making sure those businesses open. So I think the key is going to be setting, to the extent possible, epidemiological measures that will allow the economy to expand, particularly hopefully once the Omicron wave crashes.
Lastly, in terms of economic revival, what would be some of the key words there? Employment, of course, and of course trade figures needs to be improved, and when it comes to trade, diplomacy is also all important.
Yeah, so obviously, one of the most important things for voters in this election was the economy, and at least in two ways. One of which is good jobs, especially for youth, and then the other would be the problems of rising housing prices and the difficulty that people, especially younger people, have getting onto the housing ladder. I would also throw in both short-term, medium-term, and long-term, integrating women better into the workforce through, frankly speaking, some pretty widespread cultural reform that needs to happen so that there's not so much discrimination in the workplace as well as in society at large. I think that's important, and I think women have showed that they're not very happy with the current direction that this is going. And beyond that, of course, we do have this large, near global package of sanctions on Russia. And that's, of course, something that South Korea is following in almost all measures. And of course, this could have some impacts not only on products that South Korean companies sell to places like Russia, but also some of the inputs that go into parts of the South Korean economy. So obviously, one of the things that the new administration is going to have to do is walk a tightrope in terms of keeping the businesses humming here, while at the same time maintaining the sanctions that especially the U.S. and Europe expect South Korea to continue to enforce.
All right, Professor Mason Richey, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. We appreciate it.
Great, thanks for having me.
All right, that's all from us for now. Our special news coverage of the 2022 presidential election will continue on our midnight newscast. Thank you for watching.
Find the ways of Taekwondo within yourself. The mind that honors respect and kindness. The valor that